Hello again and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Today we've got another entertaining episode. I'm talking to Roy Huntington about the Taurus Judge. Is it a mechanical and ballistic abomination or the greatest thing since sliced bread? We're going to talk to Roy right now and find out about the Taurus Judge. Well, good morning, Roy.
Oh, yeah. What's good about it? I mean, hi.
Well, for those that are watching on YouTube, I've got my Hawaiian shirt on. I think it's a festive day. It's beautiful. I guess we're in early fall at this point, and I'm actually going to run away for a couple days down to the Smokies. I'll still be working, but they say the weather's great down there too. So anyway, I think it's a pretty good day. So I appreciate you joining us here on the Guns Magazine podcast, and we'll get you chipper before it's done.
Does that mean there's drinking involved or what?
This is my captain mug, even though I'm not a captain. But no, it's strictly coffee. So, well, today we are going to talk about Here Come the Judge. And this was inspired by input from our audience, our viewers on YouTube and our listeners on the podcast. And I got to admit to you, Roy, this is a gun that I've always kind of felt I've fired them. I think I've had one here for testing and evaluation, but I've never been a huge fan. And turns out you kind of are. So we're going to talk about the Taurus Judge today and hopefully answer a bunch of those questions that folks have. So let's get the big question out of the way. Why do you like these things?
Well, it's one of those things. And typical shooter is you get everybody judging it, as it were. And the vast majority of people I know who are naysayers have never had one or never shot one or never really looked at it. They just immediately go, oh, well, that's stupid. Really? Do you know anything about it? Have you ever shot one? Did you ever think how it applies? I did a video on a judge a while ago, and for some reason, it started getting a lot of comments lately. And there was one fellow there. He was such a naysayer, and he was telling me that, oh, it's a waste of time, and why would you need it? And if you need a shotgun, you should have a shotgun and stuff. And so I tried to be nice, and I addressed some of these questions with him, and he was making these broad comments about, unless it's a shotgun length barrel, a shotgun is useless, which isn't the case. And that may be another podcast, I think. So, and finally I said, well, I don't know too much about this, but I've had one since they first came out, and I've used them many times around my property. And I think, frankly, it's the world's most perfect tractor or truck gun. And
tractor gun.
It's a tractor gun. It really is. Because people talk about, I don't know a farmer or rancher anywhere who doesn't sort of have a tractor gun,
Mm-hmm.
And most are like, rusty 22s that they've got zip tied to the roll bar or, stuff like that. And I tried all that kind of stuff. But the challenge really is you're on a tractor. So you're either in a cab or you've got equipment around you and a roll bar and and levers and stuff like that. And so if you're trying to handle some kind of a long gun, you're bonking into things and you can't get it out of the case behind you and all that kind of stuff. So I used to carry a Smith & Wesson revolver and 45 Colt, and I carried CCI shot cartridges, which we talked about not too long ago, and a couple 45 Colt loads in it, and that was pretty good. Because if you had to shoot a snake or a field rat or whatever's going on, you could pretty much usually do it if you're within spitting distance. And then the ability to shoot the 45 Colts meant I had a fighting chance against the coyotes that I see now and again, and stuff like that. But I had a few what I would call sort of failures with the 45 Colt loads. And then also I didn't like the fact I was beating up my Smith & Wesson revolver out there and because it lives hard, on the tractor. And so then Taurus sent me this thing called a polymer Judge some years ago. And so basically it's a short barreled Judge, but it's got a polymer frame. And when I first got it, of course, I did the same thing. I went, well, that's stupid. Why would I want a plastic, And then I got it and it was light and it had a shorter barrel, which was handy because some of the judges have a pretty long barrel, which I
Yeah.
think, you're okay. And that's probably okay as a tractor gun. But I was really intrigued by this. And so I went ahead and loaded it up with some 45 Colt cowboy ammo. And gosh, it shot just as well as any other double action revolver I have. I mean, it was a real tack driver, as a matter of fact. And then when I put the first 2.5-inch 410 in it, which I like that more than the Magnum 410 because you really don't need all that. With the short
Right.
barrel, I'm not sure you're gaining anything, but recoil is very manageable. And lordy, it does so much better than the shot cartridges. uh,
Hmm.
Being a rifled barrel, and of course, it still throws the shot a little bit. But within 3 yards or 5 yards or so, it's darn effective. And so that's where I just went. Would it be a concealed carry gun for me? No, unless I had to, But geez, if you were walking on a trail or you were camping or you were a rancher or a fisherman, right?
Right.
It's very versatile.
Huh. Well, going down it was funny before we got started, both you and I at the same time said, did you know how many of these things there are? You counted them. There's a number of Judge
Yeah.
models. They come in stainless and black and polymer I've got barrel lengths written down here from 2.5, 3, 6.5, and the new 13-inch. I forget what it's called, the Home Defender, which I'm actually going to pick one up today and do a little review. But they've got the Raging Judge, the Public Defender, a whole bunch of them, and they've been around for a while. And they've also got the Circuit Judge, which is an 18.5-inch, essentially a shotgun, I guess. But a couple of things that I found interesting is they intentionally make the rifling shallower so it doesn't spin shot cartridges off, because if you shoot a shot cartridge through a rifled barrel, it imparts that spin, and that obviously the centrifugal force, when it exits the barrel, it tends to throw that shot out. That's why shotguns have smooth barrels. But they made the rifling a little shallower in the Judge series to help defeat that. The interesting thing, it has to have rifling. Otherwise, it's considered a short barrel shotgun, which is verboten in most places, unless you have the proper legal permits and all that. But I guess the Judge is also illegal in California anyway, because basically everything's illegal in California. So our viewers and listeners in California, you're just out of luck, I guess. But one interesting thing I've noticed is as a avid hunter and angler, I've noticed a lot of guides carry these things, usually in polymer, and I've asked him why, and it's everything from, I remember one guy that was his last ditch wild boar defense. Because if you know anything about wild boars, if they get in on you, it's a bad day, and the guides like to have something like that, and a lot of guys carry them for snakes. So I guess, like you said, fishermen, an anti-snake gun, tractor gun, truck gun. It does kind of check all those boxes, and it's not crazy expensive either.
No, and it's not. I remember when the first Judge came out. It was really funny because it was at the SHOT Show and there was a big picture of it, and we all groaned. We all went, "Well, that's the most stupid thing I've ever seen in my life. Why on earth would you do that?" And so and then of course we started getting them and shooting them and everything, and then we were thinking, well, actually, this is an interesting idea. And I remember
Yep.
at the time too, there was some discussion as to how deep does rifling have to be in order to be rifling, you know? And I'm not sure that that's really established. I guess that's worth looking into to see. The other thing I always wondered about, of course, if you want to shoot real ammunition, bulleted ammunition, this wouldn't apply, but uh, why couldn't they just have straight grooves, In other words,
Yeah.
just straight grooves down the barrel. I mean, is that rifling? I don't know if by definition it has to impart a spin or something. So If so, you could do that with just a tiny bit of, just turn it a little bit.
Yeah.
uh,
Well,
but I found though with at the ranges you're dealing with here, you're putting out so much shot with a 410 that it's still really effective.
yeah. You say they're relatively accurate with the 45 Colt. Talk a little bit about some of the testing you've done.
I mean, like, 2.5 inches at 25 yards accurate.
That's
And
acceptable.
yeah, and that's with my little polymer judge. And I think if you got one of these 4-inch barreled guns and took your time, I mean, why wouldn't it be accurate? It's made on modern CNC machinery. They're very consistent. And then I noticed when we were looking, it's like, what, they got 16 or 18 different models, but they've introduced the Judge series in 454 Cossul.
Yeah.
So, so you've got a Magnum 410 and the ability to shoot 45 Colt, 454 Cossul, any of the 45 type rounds, so 45 Smith and Wesson, and the other
Yeah.
bows like that, 45 Russian, I think they call it. But you also have, as you say, that last ditch pig defense, or last ditch anything defense. I mean, they're not glamorous. They're like they're not the fine Smith and Wesson, pre-war revolvers and all that. They're a tool, is what they are. And I
Right.
think, yeah, if people just say, well, this is a tool, and understand that not everybody needs one. I mean, you can have one. Yeah. It's like, I got one for my dad. My dad was here visiting years ago, and uh, he lived in California. And he just said he'd never seen one before. And so we took him in the backyard, and I said, well, it's this. And he was looking at it, and he said, well, it's kind of big, because as I recall, it was an all steel, like 4-inch barrel for one of the early Judges. And I said, yeah. I said, but here's what you can do with it. And I loaded it up with a couple 410s and put a silhouette target out at about 5 or 6 feet. And I said, here, shoot that. And it was like, bang, bang. And his eyes lit up. He went, holy cow. And I said, yeah, I think you need one of these, for home defense and stuff like that. So I think that there is merit for that. I mean, they don't kick very much. And I almost always just shoot Black Hills Cowboy loads in mine. So you're shooting a 250 at, I don't know, 800 feet per second. That'll solve any
Right.
problem you have.
Yep.
Uh,
And that's really one of the only kicks against them. They're a big old heavy, especially in the steel versions, gun. But they're, as we were talking though, they're not really intended to be your CCW kind of gun. If that's what you choose, great. If that's all you can have, great. Whatever. But it's not really intended for that role. So that's why most of them I've seen have been carried on guys' hips in situations where that's not a big deal.
well, somebody told me one time, oh, it's a perfect anti-carjacking gun. And
Okay.
and I thought about it for a minute. I said, well, it certainly would be effective,
Yeah.
load it with, with smaller shot. I mean, not like number 4 shot or something, and and if you're stressed, I mean, it might be effective. It tends to spread the pattern faster, closer than a standard shotgun does. And so at 3 or 4 feet, you actually get a pattern. You don't just get one little solid, shot column like you do with a longer barreled shotgun.
Right.
And so there might be potential in that. I'm not sure. I think some things for people to remember though, because I had a guy told me one time, he said, "Oh, well, I carry 410 slugs," which sounds really good, right? It's like, oh, that's a
Mm-hmm.
410 slug. Oh my gosh, because we're all thinking 12 gauge slug, 20 gauge slug, stuff like that. Well, 410 slug is 88 grains. Okay,
Exactly.
so I mean, that's like a 380, maybe, right?
Yeah.
And out of a shotgun, because I've chronographed them, they're like 1,200 feet per second or so. Okay, so an 88 grain slug at 1,200 feet per second, that's, nothing wrong with that. That'd be like getting hit with a 88 or 90 grain 357 Magnum, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
not too bad. I've actually never chronographed one out of a short barrel Judge, which now I need to go do that when we're done because I'm curious to know. And so really that's not what you want to do. Just carry a 45 Colt, because you've got a 250 grain bullet now, going at a substantial velocity. The other loads that were a bit intriguing were almost immediately the various manufacturers, Winchester especially, and I believe Federal did it too. They came out with what they called sort of personal defense 410 loads, and
Yeah.
most of them are multiple projectile, arrangements, not just like three balls. There are some that do that. Three little 32 caliber balls or whatever they
Yeah.
are, 40 caliber, I guess. And but some of them have these flat hard copper discs, you know in between little squares and stuff like that. And I've fired
Yeah.
them, and I mean, they seem to be pretty effective. I've seen some gel testing with them. I think they tend to underpenetrate.
Hmm.
So if you really are carrying one of these for personal defense, I'm not sure that I would rely on the 410 side of things. I
Yep.
would.
And
Yeah.
that's where I was going to go with that is
Mhm.
410 is not a self-defense round. Again, the caveat, if that's all you got, if that's, in that, but there are a lot better choices, including the 45 Colt. So um, occasionally you'll hear folks, and they always point back to the old Glacier safety slug, if you remember those, that it was a projectile that was basically filled with, I forget, 8-shot or 9-shot. And the thing about those weren't designed some kind of ballistic voodoo. It was so they didn't penetrate aircraft pressure holes if they were used in that situation. And then later testing, everybody realized, oh, I can poke a finger size hole in the aircraft, and it's not like the movies. It doesn't explode and suck people out through that little tiny hole. So Glazers tended to underperform badly, and they didn't really solve the purpose they were designed for. So those kind of went away. So this whole idea of using projectiles, small projectiles, it's not ballistic voodoo. It's marginal unless you're talking near contact type of wound. So go with the 45 Colt on that one.
I
Off
would
my
say
soapbox
so.
now.
I mean, would a load of 410 7.5 or 8-shot, at 2 or 3 feet get
Yeah, it
somebody's
would.
attention? Yeah, I think it would, and it would probably distract them from doing whatever it was they were doing. I'm not sure that it would stop them. In other words, like
Right.
put them down on the ground. It may, if you were really close, because
Yeah.
I've done that, shred the potatoes with it. And I will say that you end up with shredded breakfast potatoes, when you shoot
Yeah.
with a 410. But I think the lesson for me, though, is that once again, shooters need to keep an open mind. And so just because you don't have a use for a gun like this doesn't mean that it's not a useful gun. Uh, I did a video the other day, and I shot my little 9 millimeter rimfire garden gun. And so it looks like a 38 special, but it's 9 millimeter. It's rimfire. It's a Flobert round. It's got number 10 shot, a quarter ounce of number 10 shot in it. And but it's a dedicated miniature shotgun, so it has a smoothbore barrel. And out to 8 or 10 yards, it's really effective, and it's like a well-centered, dense group. I shot a miscreant gray squirrel with it just the other day outside of the garage, and he was dead right there. And that was not the success I normally have with the small shot cartridges, from
Yeah.
revolvers. So I think there's merit to this, and if you like I said, if you have a use for it, then you should look into it. I'm getting one of those lever action 22 long rifle garden guns from Henry,
Ah.
based on what we've been doing lately, and so they've got one that they're going to send to me. It's been my experience the 22 long rifle doesn't really work as well as the other ones, but we'll find out.
Well, as we mentioned in the Snake Shot podcast, the your favorite target is the wily uh, Idaho Spud. I still laugh about that, but you're so right. I mean, it's not for ballistic testing, but it certainly gives you good visual representation of your shot pattern, and inexpensive. And You got to be careful though. You wound an Idaho baker, they'll come after you.
I normally have somebody with a backup gun, and like they say, make sure you use enough gun if you're taking on those. You get a 1 pound potato, that's pretty substantial. So, uh, but when armed with a judge, I mean, it's just such a versatile thing. It's almost like a pair of vice grips. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's not a perfect set of pliers. It's not a perfect crescent wrench. It's not a perfect, other
Sure.
things. But if you need one, it's pretty versatile, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this is. So especially with
Yep.
these new chamberings, and I think if you picked up that new one they're making with the longer barrel. Wait, I have it written down here. The Taurus Judge Home Defender.
Home Defender. Yep. 13-inch barrel.
Yeah, and it looks like it has a polymer forend maybe, so you would
Mm-hmm.
hang on to it with a raw. And as I recall when I was reading about it, it's got some sort of a protective cover around the barrel and cylinder gap. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're holding the forend, you're not going to get blasted by that. And so,
Ah.
I mean, I'm going to keep an open mind on this. I'm not sure that's a real good idea for home defense. Do you remember when we were policemen in the early days of police, it was popular to have pistol grip Remington 870 shotguns? You remember
Oh
those
yeah.
in the old
Oh yeah.
days? Yeah, they had that one that the stock folded over the top of it.
Oh, you mean the face slicer?
Yeah, yeah, that
Or
was
the
a
cheese
stupid thing.
grater?
Yep.
Yeah.
And everyone thought they were so cool, and they looked pretty macho and all that other
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But I quickly found when you're shooting them out there in front of you like that, they were really hard to index on the target because as your pistol moved from left to right, back and forth like that, you couldn't really index it. If you could tuck a butt underneath your arm, well, then you could really index a lot better. And so basically we just gave up on them. We just said, these are stupid,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and again, going back to basic ballistics, everybody thinks that, okay, it's only got a short barrel, 16-inch or whatever. Still, even across the room, the shot is not much bigger than the 12 gauge. So you're basically shooting a pistol still at that range.
Mhm.
So you're shooting a pistol that's hard to aim. It just was not super practical. Now, if you get into the ones that had the real short barrels that again, you have to have registered and all that stuff or wear legal. Now you're talking shot spreads up close and personal, which is the whole idea behind the sawed-off shotgun. But those long barrel ones, and of course I had one because it looked cool and had the Packmeyer pistol grip because those things hurt unless you were shooting, some skeet loads or something. It got your attention. But anyway, back
They
to
did
the
hurt. Well, I think to validate the judge's principle is that I was actually thinking, and I talked about it when I made a comment to the one guy who was a naysayer, was when I was a policeman, we used to go down to the crime lab or down to the property room and see what guns they had impounded. Just because I was always interested. It's like, what'd you get? What's this? What that? And so I saw one day they had a 20 gauge H&R like break open single shot shotgun, but someone had cut it off to about 12 inches. And so it was essentially a cylinder bore, right?
Mhm.
And I thought, well, I've never actually shot a shotgun that was 10 or 12 inches like that. And so we scrounged around a little bit. We found a longer barreled single shot 20 gauge shotgun. And so we cut that barrel off at about, it was probably 18 or 20 inches. So, and we measure, they were both cylinder bore, right? And so then we fired them with birdshot. And you know what? Much to my surprise, they actually both delivered very similar groups.
No
Uh,
kidding.
yeah, the patterns on the targets, and we were shooting close, like maybe, but the pattern on the target was very similar. So, the short barreled judge seems to still be okay in looking at it in
Yeah.
retrospect.
Well, maybe instead of sawing off the barrel, rifling the barrel might make a bigger difference if you're looking for that short range shot spread. So,
Yeah.
interesting concept. Now, I'm going to probably elicit some hate mail, and that's okay. But I'm going to make a wild generalization here. And this is in closing. I tend to see judges carried in our favorite thing in the world, the clamshell pack 9.99 nylon holster with the strap. And if you're going to carry one of these, great, more power to you, but spend some money and get a decent holster, please. We can't emphasize that enough. Whatever gun you're going to carry, if it's going to be a pistol on your person, get a decent holster. They do make them, but yeah, I've thinking back to some of my guiding or my days of going with guides, and I've seen a lot of those. I've seen some in good holsters, but I've seen a lot of them in Uncle Billy Bob's cheap nylon holster. Don't do that,
Well,
folks.
that's,
Okay.
and I'm guilty with that. I bought a $5 flap nylon camo holster at a gun show, and I zip tied it to my roll bar on my tractor, and that's where my
Yeah.
judge lives there. you
Well,
know,
that's a little different deal. That's
yeah,
on your tractor.
it works. They do. I noticed that they've just announced I think that it's the executive judge or something like that, but it's made at their custom shop. So it's of similar nature to their latest introduction, their fighting revolver that they just did, stainless steel. So it's upgraded. So it's a nicer finish. It's hand fit. It's put together extra special. And so, if you have a gun like that, I really like your idea of getting something with a little better holster. And this may actually push that side of the industry. This whole growth of judges, I thought they had 4 or 5 models. I really didn't realize that there were this many.
Yeah.
So,
But yeah, it pretty much amazed me. So, drawing to a close here after I've upset everybody carrying a cheap holster, including apparently Roy. Um, what's your takeaway on the Judge?
it's a good tool, and if you have things that need this kind of a tool, then here's one of them. But basically, farmer, rancher, hiker, camper, guide, evidently. Anybody who needs a general tool like this would have one. Years ago, they had a thing called a snake charmer, I think they called it. You
I
remember that?
those, yeah.
It was that silly little single shot. I think it was break open, and it had a funny stock that you couldn't really put it up against your shoulder, but so it wasn't really a pistol, and it wasn't really a shotgun, and it wasn't, and we all scratched our head on that one too when it came out. We thought we liked it. We think it was cute in a 410. Well, it almost immediately found a home with non-gun people who were campers, who like motorhome campers and stuff like that. And they basically would just keep one in the cabinet in their motorhome. So while they were camping in the desert or whatever, if there was a big diamondback rattlesnake that insisted on hanging out, they would go and get it, put a 410 in it, walk outside, shoot the snake, So even that, once we started looking at it as a tool rather than as a really cool gun, that it found a home. So I think that's what the Judge is.
Excellent. And I got to say, Roy, I don't know if you've seen reader mail recently. We got a nasty gram in regards to our snake shot. How dare you kill defenseless animals?
Oh, yeah.
If you're talking a big diamondback, I wouldn't call that defenseless. So again, don't go randomly killing snakes just for the joy of killing snakes. It's, they are a vital part of the ecosystem, but they don't need to be a vital part at your motorhome or your cabin or anything like that. So,
well,
anyway.
I think before we go, I think to talk about that just for a second is that it's in my experience, most of those people live in some urban environment and have never been affected by anything like that. Yeah. And so I've had a few visitors here who've come from Southern California. And so as we're out walking around and stuff like that, and I say, oh, well, there's a copperhead. And well, they lose their mind,
Yeah.
It's like, and they run, and it's like, oh, well, where are you going? Just come here.
Well, you sent me a picture of the rattlesnake that was next to your tractor or whatever in the barn. No, I'm sorry. You've invaded my space at that point, and he paid the ultimate price, and I don't have a problem with that. So.
He did pay the ultimate price. So anyway, Judge, I really think if you keep an open mind go in and look at one, and then, just keep in mind, you've got a pretty nice 45 Colt revolver, which in and of itself is a good thing. You get them with adjustable sights if you want to. But then it also has the added ability of shooting 410 shotgun shells, which is kind of handy. And so I think look upon it as a 45 Colt revolver that also has this other thing, rather than a 410 shotgun that also shoots 45 Colt.
Well, Roy, great stuff. Good information. You've sold me. I'll be picking up the Home Defender today from my FFL, so you'll be seeing a review sometime in the near future in Guns Magazine, and maybe some video stuff. But after I get out and take it for a whirl, maybe we can reconvene and talk about it some more, because you've really opened my mind to the Taurus Judge. So once again, thanks for joining us here on the morning edition of the Guns Magazine podcast. Well, it was great talking to Roy Huntington about the Taurus Judge, and I got to admit, he's opened my eyes a little bit. I think I'm going to have to pick one up for all my outdoor adventures. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. On behalf of everybody who works here at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat reminding you, now get out there and get shooting.